The snow had been falling since noon, the kind of heavy, wet January snow that turned Toronto's financial district into something almost peaceful between the rush hours. If you forgot for a moment that your boots were soaked through and your shift had started at 7 that morning. Rowan pressed her back against the service corridor wall and counted the tables she still had to reset before the evening service began. 11. Maybe 12 if the Hendersons extended their lunch again. She'd been working doubles at the Sovereign since her brother Finn's accident last September. Ever since the OHIP coverage ran out and the physiotherapy bills started arriving with the quiet persistence of something inevitable. The hotel job was supposed to be 3 months, just long enough to get Finn walking again, just long enough to clear the debt and breathe. January had arrived and she was still here. Rowan. Paulette's voice came through the earpiece, low and efficient. I need you on the 42nd floor. Private dining. Rowan glanced at her half-reset section. I'm in the middle of. I know. I need someone who doesn't rattle. Private dining on 42 was the Sovereign's version of a secret. Most guests didn't know it existed. A single room accessible only by a dedicated elevator requiring a key card, with windows overlooking the lake and a kitchen staffed by whoever the hotel considered its most discreet. Rowan had been up there exactly twice before. Once for a provincial cabinet minister who'd brought someone who wasn't his wife. Once for a visiting tech billionaire who'd eaten nothing and talked to no one and left after 40 minutes, leaving a tip that covered 2 weeks of Finn's physiotherapy. She found Paulette outside the service lift, a woman who'd run the Sovereign's food and beverage operation for 16 years and had the posture of someone who'd survived every conceivable crisis without flinching. His name is Mr. Caruso, Paulette said, handing Rowan a small card with a handwritten list. He arrives in 40 minutes. He'll want the menu, but he won't look at it. Whatever he orders, it will be simple. He has a preference for privacy that I want you to take seriously. Serious how? Paulette met her eyes. Don't ask questions. Don't hover. Don't make yourself memorable. Rowan wanted to point out that those 3 things described her entire professional philosophy. She didn't. Anyone else coming up with him? Paulette's expression did something careful and controlled. 2 associates will dine with him. A 3rd man may come and go. Don't engage with the 3rd man. On the elevator ride up, Rowan read the handwritten card twice and then tucked it into her apron pocket. 42 was already prepared when she arrived, the room arranged with the spare elegance that wealthy guests seemed to prefer. A single long table set for 3, floral arrangement kept low enough not to obstruct eye lines, the lake grey and enormous through the floor-to-ceiling glass. She spent the next 20 minutes going over the setup with the attention of someone who knew that invisible competence was its own kind of protection. If you did everything right, guests forgot you were there. Being forgotten was the safest place to be. Mr. Caruso arrived at 6:12, precisely, which told her something. Men who arrived precisely were men who controlled their time because they'd learned the cost of not controlling it. He was perhaps 50, broad-shouldered, with dark hair going silver at the temples and the kind of face that had once been conventionally handsome and had since become something more authoritative. He wore a charcoal suit, well cut without being theatrical, and he moved through the room the way certain men do, as though the room had been arranged for him and this was simply how rooms worked. Mr. Caruso, Rowan approached with the measured warmth that Paulette called appropriate distance. I'm Rowan, and I'll be taking care of you this evening. Water with lemon while you wait for your guests. He looked at her with the brief, thorough attention of someone who assessed quickly and filed the information away. Yes, and whatever the kitchen has in the way of a bread service. Of course. She returned to the service station. Her hands were steady. She was good at this. His 2 associates arrived within minutes of each other. The first introduced himself as Mr. Vance, compact and watchful, with the air of someone whose job involved anticipating problems. The second was younger, more relaxed, named Brennan, who smiled easily and ordered sparkling water in an accent she placed somewhere in the Italian diaspora. They spoke quietly, the 3 of them, shifting between English and occasional brief phrases she didn't recognize, and Rowan moved through the room with the practiced invisibility that the job required. The 3rd man arrived at 6:40. She was refilling Mr. Caruso's water when she heard the elevator. The sound was wrong before she consciously understood why. The elevator in 42 opened into a small vestibule with a frosted glass panel that diffused the light, and the shadow that moved across it was moving differently than a hotel guest moves. There was something rehearsed in the stillness, and her body registered it before her brain finished processing. The vestibule door opened. The man who stepped into the room was not any of the 3 she'd been told to expect. He was perhaps mid-30s, wearing the right kind of clothes for this environment, which was exactly the kind of detail that made her stomach drop. You didn't wear the right clothes accidentally. He paused just inside the doorway, eyes moving to Mr. Caruso with the fixed quality of someone who'd arrived knowing precisely where to look. Rowan was standing between them. She didn't decide. That was the thing she'd try to explain later and fail, because there was no decision in it. Her body understood before she did, the same way you pull your hand from a hot element before the pain arrives. What she understood, in the fraction of a second she had, was that the man's right hand was moving inside his jacket, and that the sound she heard, sharp, mechanical, final, was not ambiguous. She stepped in front of Mr. Caruso. The crack of the shot was so loud in the enclosed space that for a moment she thought she'd gone deaf. Mr. Vance was already moving, throwing himself at the man from the left, and Brennan had overturned the table between them, and Rowan found herself pressed to the floor with Mr. Caruso's hand on her arm and a burning sensation that started at her left side and didn't stop. "Stay down." His voice was low and completely controlled. "Stay exactly where you are." Things happened very quickly after that, and she experienced them in fragments, the sounds of struggle. Someone on a phone, speaking in low, rapid sentences. Mr. Vance's voice saying something that did not require a response. Then a different quality of silence, the kind that settles after a threat has been neutralized rather than simply interrupted. "She's been hit." It was Brennan who said it. He was kneeling beside her with his jacket pressed against her left side, not panicking, which she noted with distant, floaty appreciation. "It went through. Clean. But she needs, I know what she needs, Mr." Caruso was there too, his face closer than it should be for a man she'd just met, his dark eyes steady on hers. "What's your name?" "Rowan. Rowan, you're going to be fine. I need you to press here and keep looking at me." The police already called. "Look at me." She looked at him. There wasn't much else to do. The paramedics arrived in under 7 minutes, which someone would later tell her was quite good for a 42nd floor private room on a snowy January evening. The police were behind them. Rowan answered questions with the careful precision of someone in shock, who'd decided that shock was not allowed right now, describing the man, the angle, the sequence of events with the reliability that came from having spent years noticing details that other people missed. At some point, someone mentioned that Mr. Caruso had stayed with her until the paramedics arrived, which she found notable, because men like that did not typically stay. The hospital was St. Michael's, and it was both very busy and very efficient, which was how Toronto hospitals tended to operate. The bullet had passed clean through the upper left side of her torso without hitting anything that would cause long-term damage, which the ER doctor described as extremely fortunate, with the quiet authority of someone who'd seen the other outcomes. She'd need a few days minimum, a week more likely, stitches and monitoring, and the kind of enforced stillness that her life had not recently allowed for. Her brother Finn arrived at 11:15, still on his physiotherapy crutches, pale and furious in the way people are when they've been terrified and are converting it into something more manageable. "What happened?" he said, sitting down too fast and nearly missing the chair. There was an incident at work. She'd been preparing the version of events that was honest without being terrifying for approximately 40 minutes. Someone got into the private dining floor who shouldn't have been there. There was a gun. I moved before I thought about it, and I got grazed. I'm going to be completely fine. The doctor already said so. You got shot, grazed, Rowan. I know. She reached over and took his hand, which felt like an insufficient gesture but was the one she had available. I know. I'm okay. Finn stared at her for a long moment, with the expression of someone calculating how much he wasn't being told. He was 23, and he'd always been perceptive in the quiet way that people who don't talk much often are. "Finn," she said carefully, "do you remember Aunt Deborah's house in Brampton?" His eyes sharpened. This was old family code. When things were complicated, is that where we are for now? Just for now. A detective named Yoon arrived at midnight and spent 30 minutes asking questions that Rowan answered fully, because she had nothing to hide and because instinct told her that partial honesty in this situation would create more problems than none. Detective Yoon took careful notes, had the compact precision of someone who'd stopped being surprised by anything years ago, and at the end of his questions he said something that changed the texture of the evening. "Mrs. Rowan, do you know who Mr. Caruso is?" She said she knew his name and that he was a hotel guest. Detective Ewan's expression suggested this was accurate but not complete. Dominic Caruso is one of the more significant figures in a certain category of organized business in southern Ontario. The individual who accessed the 42nd floor tonight has ties to a group that has been in a protracted dispute with Mr. Caruso's organization for approximately 18 months. This was not a random event, and it was not intended for you. Rowan absorbed this slowly, the way you absorb information that confirms what you'd already suspected, but had been hoping to be wrong about. So the person who tried to shoot him is part of something larger. Correct, and you interfered with a significant operation. Ewan held her gaze steadily. People involved in these operations tend to view interference as a problem requiring resolution. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand that you are not in an ordinary situation and you should treat it accordingly. He handed her his card. Mr. Caruso has already spoken with our liaison and has offered to provide private security for you while his team investigates. I'm not in a position to recommend accepting that offer, but I'm also not in a position to pretend the department has resources for individual protective detail at this level. What are you in a position to do? Be honest with you. He stood, tucking his notebook away. Which I have been. Call me if anything changes. After he left, Rowan sat in the hospital room and looked at the ceiling for a long time. The monitor beside her made its small, patient sounds. Outside the window, Toronto glittered through the snow, millions of lives organized into their separate trajectories, mostly predictable, occasionally catastrophic. Dominic Caruso came at 7 the next morning. He'd changed from last night into something more casual, dark trousers and navy coat, hair slightly damp from the cold outside. He carried a paper bag from what turned out to be a bakery on King Street that Rowan had liked since she was a teenager, which meant someone had done research, which she didn't know how to feel about. I wanted to come last night, he said, stopping at the appropriate distance from her bed. You were being assessed. How are you feeling? Better than I expected to. She studied him in the morning light. Last night he'd been a guest, then an emergency. Now she could see him more clearly. There was something about him that she recognized without being able to name. The quality of someone who had made irreversible decisions and learned to live forward from them, rather than looking back. Detective Yoon came. I know. He was candid. He usually is. A brief expression moved across Dominic's face that might have been something like respect. I asked him to be. Rowan looked at the paper bag. Did you bring that so I'd feel more comfortable saying yes to whatever you're about to offer? A pause. Something that was almost a smile. Partly, at least that's honest. She shifted carefully against the pillow. You want to offer me protection, your people, your resources, because I prevented something your enemies invested significant effort into, yes, and because you feel responsible. He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that wasn't discomfort, it was thought. I feel a debt. Those aren't the same thing, but they're related. What you did last night, you didn't hesitate. Most people hesitate. I wasn't thinking. No, your instincts were faster than your thinking, which is a rarer quality than people realize. He moved to the chair beside her bed, sitting without asking, which she should have found presumptuous and somehow didn't. I'd like to understand why you were working a double shift on a Tuesday in January when you're clearly overqualified to be doing it. The question was direct enough that she answered it honestly, which she suspected was the intention. She told him about Finn, the accident, the physio bills, the number that crept up by small increments every month, while her savings crept down. She told it plainly, without self-pity, because she'd made her decisions with eyes open and didn't require sympathy for them. He listened the way certain people listen, with actual attention. Your brother, he said when she finished. Where is he now? Home. I made him go home at 2 in the morning because there was nothing more he could do and he needed sleep for his morning exercises. He lives with you? For now. Until he's mobile enough to manage on his own. She paused. Why? Because the concern I have is not only for you. Dominic met her eyes directly. The people who sent that man last night are aware that the attempt failed. They will be looking for ways to apply pressure. That can include people connected to you. The floor dropped out of Rowan's chest. She'd been so focused on the implications for herself that she hadn't fully processed the geometry of it, that Finn was part of this now too, not because of anything he'd done, but because of his proximity to her. You're telling me he's at risk. I'm telling you it's a possibility I'd prefer to address before it becomes a reality. Dominic's voice was careful, not cruel. The voice of someone delivering necessary information rather than frightening her deliberately. I have a property in Muskoka. Secure, isolated, staffed by people I trust. It's been used for exactly this kind of situation before. I'd like you and your brother to be there while my team handles the resolution. Muskoka, she repeated. In January the lake is frozen, it's quiet. I don't know you. No. He held her gaze. But you saved my life, Rowan. In the time it took for most people to register that something was happening, you moved to put yourself between me and a bullet. That tells me things about who you are. I'd like you to let me extend something equivalent. She thought about Finn coming through the door last night on his crutches. About the number on the latest physiotherapy invoice sitting on her kitchen counter. About the way Detective Ewan had said what he'd said, not as a warning, but as a kindness which was its own kind of warning. I need to think about it, she said. Dominic nodded, standing. He reached into his coat and produced a card, plain and heavy, with a name and a number. "That's Alderman. He's the head of my security. He'll answer immediately, day or night." He set the card on the bedside table. "The offer doesn't expire, but I'd ask that you think quickly. Why does everyone keep saying that? Because it's true." He paused at the door. "The bakery on King Street, the one you like. You went there every Saturday before your brother's accident?" She stared at him. "We do thorough background when someone saves a life." The almost smile again. "It seemed important to know who you were." He left, and Rowan sat with her thoughts and her hospital breakfast and the heavy card with the name Alderman on it, and she thought about what it meant that someone had cared enough to find out what her Saturdays used to look like. She called Finn at 9. He didn't say much when she explained it, which was how she knew he'd been thinking along the same lines. There was a long pause, and then, "Is it safe? The alternative is less safe. Okay." Another pause. "Can I bring my exercise bands? You can bring whatever you need." She called Alderman at 9:15. He arrived at 10 with 2 other men, organized and efficient, and by afternoon they were on the 400 North, through the frozen Ontario landscape, the city receding behind them into something smaller and more manageable. The property outside of Gravenhurst was not what Rowan had imagined, though she'd told herself not to imagine anything. It sat back from the lake on a long private road, a house built in the Canadian style of someone who had money, and preferred their wealth to announce itself quietly, timber and stone, and large windows looking out over the snow-covered ice. It was beautiful in the grey January way that the Shield tends to be beautiful, austere and enormous and entirely indifferent to your opinion of it. Dominic was there when they arrived, which she hadn't expected. "You're staying here," Rowan said. "It wasn't a question. I spend winters here when I can." He met Finn at the car with the easy directness of someone who didn't treat injury as a reason for awkwardness, taking Finn's bag without making it a production. "You're in the East Wing, your own entrance, your own kitchen if you prefer privacy. The physiotherapy room is on the ground level, fully equipped. Alderman will run you through the security protocols tonight after dinner." Finn looked around at the frozen lake and the timber and the absolute quiet. "This is genuinely incredible," he said. "Make yourself at home." Dominic's voice was dry, but not unkindly. He was a different person here than he'd been in the hotel. Rowan noticed it incrementally over the first few days, the way the careful control that he wore in professional settings eased slightly at the edges. He worked in the mornings in a study off the main living space, phone calls and documents, and the contained industry of someone managing complex things from a distance. But in the afternoons, when the work seemed to resolve itself, he was simply present in the house. He asked about her thesis one evening, the research paper she was finishing for the community health certificate she'd been working on, in whatever hours the Sovereign left her. She'd mentioned it once, offhandedly, and he'd remembered and asked a specific question about her methodology, and she found herself talking about community trauma responses in urban housing contexts for 40 minutes, while the fire did what fires do in January in Muskoka. "You should be doing this full time," he said. "I know that. What stopped you? Finn's accident stopped me. Before that, money." He was quiet for a moment in the way she was coming to recognize as thought rather than absence. "What would it take?" "Financially, I'm not asking you for money. I didn't ask you if you were asking." He turned slightly from the fire to look at her. "I'm asking a different question." She told him the number, because she'd done the calculation so many times it was always right there, the precise figure between where she was and where she needed to be. His expression didn't change, which told her the number was not surprising to him, which she supposed it wouldn't be. "Let me think about something," he said. She didn't ask what. She'd learned that Dominic Caruso's thinking was usually followed by something worth waiting for. The second week brought a development that Alderman briefed them on calmly and without drama. A man named Prescott, low level within the organization that had sent the shooter, had been found providing ongoing information to outside parties. The discovery had been made through what Alderman described as standard investigation, and the immediate threat assessment had shifted in ways that were, in Alderman's word, encouraging. Dominic told her separately, that evening, sitting at the kitchen table with coffee between them. "Encouraging means the negotiation is working," he said. "The group behind this, they're not ideologues. They're businessmen in a particular kind of business. They sent that man because they thought it would solve a problem. It created more problems. Now they're more interested in settlement than escalation. How long? Weeks, not months. Probably." A pause. "I don't want to promise what I can't guarantee." "I appreciate that more than you know." He said it carefully. The manager called Alderman. There were liability questions they needed to resolve. They've offered severance. She'd expected this. She'd expected it the day it happened, honestly, the way you sometimes know the shape of a consequence before it arrives. I see, I'd like to make that whole. The lost income and then some, and the balance you need for your studies. It's not charity. His voice was steady, and he was looking at her directly. You walked in front of a bullet because your instincts are decent and fast, and they work. I'm not in the habit of letting debts stand unresolved. Rowan looked at him across the kitchen table in the January house with the frozen lake beyond the window, and she thought about the moment in the 42nd floor dining room when she had moved without deciding, and about all the ways a single unremarkable moment could restructure everything that comes after. "Tell me something," she said. "The man who betrayed you, Prescott. What happened to him?" Dominic's expression was careful. He was given an opportunity to relocate and a reason to take it seriously. "You let him go. He had a family. What he did was motivated by pressure from outside, not disloyalty from inside." He held her gaze. "There are lines I prefer not to cross if there's another option, and if there wasn't another option, there usually is if you look for it." He paused. "I don't always look hard enough. I'm trying to do better at that." Rowan was quiet for a moment. Outside, the snow had started again, soft and vertical in the still air over the lake, and Finn's light was on in the east wing, and the house was warm in the particular way that houses are warm when they're genuinely occupied, rather than merely heated. "The thing about the bakery," she said. "Yes, and knowing about my studies, and the specific number of what I need." She looked at him. "You do thorough research on people who matter to the situation," he agreed. "Am I still just a situation?" The question landed in the room and stayed there. Dominic was quiet in a way that was different from his usual quiet, more considered, less certain. "No," he said finally. "You haven't been for a while." She didn't look away. "Then be straightforward with me. Not about security or logistics. About this." He held her gaze with the steadiness of someone who had navigated difficult truths for years and knew the cost of avoiding them. "I find you remarkable. Your instincts, your practicality, the way you love your brother without making it smaller than it is. The way you talk about your work like it matters because it does." A pause. "I also know that I am a person with a complicated history making a longer road to simplicity, and that's not a fair thing to ask someone to share." "I didn't ask you what was fair," Rowan said. "I asked you to be honest." Something shifted in his expression, the careful control still there, but with something underneath it now that was more open. "Then, honestly, I'd like the chance to show you who I'm trying to become, not just who I've been." It was the right answer. Not because it was perfect or simple, but because it was true and she knew the difference. She picked up her coffee. "Your property taxes up here must be extraordinary." He blinked. "I'm just noting," she said, "that if someone were going to spend more time in Muskoka, they'd want to make sure they could justify the upkeep." A pause. And then Dominic Caruso did something she hadn't seen from him yet. He laughed, quietly but genuinely, and it altered his face in a way that made her understand who he'd been before everything else had started. "I could probably justify it," he said. "Probably," she agreed. 6 weeks later, the resolution came the way that resolutions in complicated arrangements tend to, not with ceremony, but with a phone call that Alderman took in the hallway and summarized in 3 sentences. The negotiation had concluded. The group had agreed to terms. The threat assessment was, in Alderman's careful phrasing, resolved. Rowan and Finn drove back to Toronto on a March morning. When the ice on the lake had started to shift and the sky was the particular pale blue, that means winter is reconsidering itself. Finn had graduated from the crutches to a cane to, on good days, nothing at all, and he sat in the passenger seat in comfortable silence the way he'd always been able to, which was one of the things she loved best about him. "You're going to see him again," Finn said. "Somewhere outside of Barrie." It wasn't a question. "Yes." "He called while you were packing," asked Finn, looked out at the highway. "He remembered which muscle groups were giving me trouble." Rowan kept her eyes on the road. "He pays attention." "Yeah." A pause. "So do you." Her thesis was accepted that April. The funding, arranged with the low-key efficiency she'd come to expect from Dominic, allowed her to start the graduate program in the fall with enough stability to actually think about the work rather than counting hours. She visited her mother's grave with Finn on a Sunday in May, something she'd been doing since they were children. And she told her mother the broad outlines of everything that had happened with the selective candor that conversations with the dead allow for. What she didn't say, because she was still working out how to hold it, was that she'd stepped in front of a stranger because her instincts were fast, and that the stranger had turned out to be someone who made her feel, for the first time in longer than she could remember, like her life was moving towards something rather than simply persisting through it. Some things you only understand in the after. The moment was over in a second. What followed took much longer and mattered much more.